We've got John Hards and Adam Piggott here talking about the UK property market and how technology is going to be involved. So John Hards, first of all, has been working in property lettings for 45 years, including 35 years at Countrywide, where he was instrumental in growing the letting side of the business. He was one of the first people there to grow it, and has been a significant part of the organisation, bringing it to the size it is now. He was the managing director of Countrywide Residential for 25 years and has been a director of the ALA and the Tenancy Deposit Scheme. And he's now on the board of blockchain-based Rightmove challenger Openbrix. Adam Piggott, who's also joining us to speak, is now the CEO of Openbrix. He's also been working and has over 30 years of experience in property and residential lettings, has been founder and director of several proptech startups, and before which he was a former independent specialist lettings agent, which he sold to Countrywide in 2014. So very grateful to have these two big brains and very experienced guys talking about what's happening in the UK residential property lettings market, but also what's changing with some of the new technologies out there, and specifically blockchain and what's going to be happening going forward with how technology and automation are going to be changing the UK property market. But I have asked them also to give an overview about how the COVID-19 pandemic and current situations are just changing things, just to give your expertise and your research into what's happening now in the UK market. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. That's very kind of you. So this started for me with a conversation with a colleague of mine, Shahad, at Openbrix, and he said, do you mind doing me a favour, John, and talking to Erica? She just wants to talk to you about some property and maybe having a quick Q&A and a session on property. So I phoned Erica probably in early April, and we had a nice long discussion. It was lockdown. I was out in my back garden, and as we were talking, I said, lovely day out here, and I'm enjoying the sunshine. And Erica, you said, yeah, I'm enjoying the sunshine as well. In fact, I'm sitting in my bikini by the pool. So it gave me this image of this is how it all started. So I said I'd do it with Adam. So I don't know if you can see, I had the two guys here, Adam and John, and obviously you can see it's for real, but I thought I'd put this caption about washing hands. It seems appropriate. I know we're on screen. Yeah, you're the ugly one, yeah. Anyway, so you've heard about John and Adam. What I thought I'd do is just talk through, not about the politics of the property industry, but register some milestones that have occurred and happened through my career, which, as Erica says, about 45 years. So it's actually 47 years. I started in 1973, and when I started work, the Rent Act, 1965 Rent Act, was in force. So I thought I'd use these milestones. But before I go into that, yesterday I just had a quick look at the decades and how different decades have changed with the property market. In the 1960s, we had 53 million population, but not, believe it or not, not every home in the UK. Yeah, so, you know, believe it or not, back in the 60s, doesn't seem that long ago, but not everybody had electricity at home. And I actually worked, when I first went out to look at properties, and particularly some in the poorer parts of London, they didn't have electricity, they had gas lighting. A loaf of bread cost 3p, and the average house price was about £2,500 to £3,000. In the 70s, population went up by 1 million, it was 54 million. A bottle of wine cost £1, and a pint of lager in a pub cost 20p. By 1975, the average house price about £10,000. The 1980s went up by 1 million, the population 56 million. A pint of milk was 20p by then. Average house price about 55k. 90s, the population up another by 2 million, 58 million. House prices up at an average of 60,000 at the start, and in London 140,000 at the end of that. Manchester about 70,000. In the 2000s, we saw prices increase from 140, and in London by the late 90s there were 270,000. But also through the late 90s, we had home ownership at its peak at 71% of the population. So that's quite a lot of people. 2010, we saw an average house price of 160, and then 330 in London. 500,000 people at that stage. 500,000 homes at that stage had 6 or more occupants. And that was because of the high price of housing. It was starting to push that way. And now we have much more regulation about homes in multiple occupation. In 2013, we saw the Shard completed, and there were 10 apartments in the Shard that sold between 30 and 50 million, just to put things in perspective. At that time, the loaf of bread that would have cost you 5p, had it followed house price inflation, would have been £4.36, and 2 litres of milk, £10.45. So yeah, if they'd followed the house price inflation at the same rate, that's what you'd have got. 2016, average house price is about 300k, and in London, averagely 500k, Kensington 2 million. So it sort of puts a perspective around where we are. Population today, 65, 66 million. So I'll start my slides. The first one, I hope everybody can see all of the slide, but you had the Rent Act 65 come in. And this was a consolidation. In fact, in the First World War, 1915, they put controls on rent, principally because there was a real shortage of housing and landlords were tending to exploit rent. So they put a cap on rents and introduced rent control based on rateable values. That was supposed to occur for 6 months or to the end of the war, but it never got relieved. It was carried on. There were a number of Housing Act, Rent Acts that updated that. The one I started working that was in existence at the time was the 65 Housing Act. That also brought in fair rents. It changed the way that rents were calculated. You couldn't pay a premium. There were no eviction rights, so you couldn't get rid of a tenant very easily without a court order. Court orders were extremely hard to obtain. And the effect of the legislation that we'd experienced since then had strangled the rental market. It meant there were only trusts that were really about welfare that were interested in it, but no pension funds, those things. So it had reduced the quality and level of rented accommodation in the UK. Relationships between landlords and tenants were quite strained and difficult, and repairs, and maintenance of properties wasn't carried out very much. So conditions were poor. So just a brief touch on the 1965 Act. It brought in a rent officer service. The first one was created in Westminster. First ever rent registered was above a fish and chip shop in the Paddington Road, Marylebone. Fair rents take into consideration condition and location, but not the scarcity factor, and that's what had been going on for many years. So they weren't market rents, they were very reduced rents. You could apply for them using a government form. I used to do hundreds of them in my youth. I got very good at applying for registered rents on an RR1, that was the form you used. When it was approved, there were very small increases on a weekly rent. When they were approved, they were phased in over 3 years. So it took 3 years to get the new increase that you'd agreed. Many of these tenancies still remain because the security of tenure that was granted enabled people to stay there for life, but also to pass on to their children succession. So if the child had been living there for 6 months before the parents died, then they were entitled to take over the tenancy and have the same rights. And that's why many still exist today. 73, I remember this well. We had a recession between 73 and 75. But up until that time, 1970 to 73, you'd seen a doubling of property prices, an exceptional thing at that time. It was quite novel. I remember my parents being shocked by it and telling me every week, look at the price of houses today. The recession was caused by a world oil crisis. The miners then decided to strike in December. The government, Ted Heath's government, thought that limiting fuel supplies in case we ran out. So they asked commerce to shut down to a 3-day week. We had blackouts, we had strikes, we had unemployment rising. And I sort of remember eating meals by candlelight. I know, Adam, you often eat your meal by candlelight anyway. He still does. Yeah, we had a sugar shortage. I have a very sweet tooth. I remember distinctly the sugar shortage. queues for petrol. I used to fill my motorbike up. It cost 50p to fill my bike up at that time. But the recession, we had a downturn in GDP by nearly 4%. The stock market collapsed by 73%. It took 14 quarters to recover the market at that time. Of course, house prices dropped. Banks were left out of pocket. Now, some of that, the reason I put that in is some of it reminds me of today with lockdown. It's not quite lockdown, but it has a slight resonance, that recession. So along came the Rent Act in 1977. It consolidated a good number of changes that had gone on since the 65 one. I remember distinctly that tenants and landlords, or tenants experienced poor things in their properties, and landlords weren't really prepared to improve them or repair them. And some fell into quite bad disrepair. So the council would send along repair notices. I used to encourage that. Landlords never minded a repair notice if you could get a grant. So I spent lots of my youth organising repairs, major repairs on buildings, obtaining grants and improving buildings, those with gas lighting or whatever. So that was all part of my job. Vacant possession values, is worth sort of mentioning at that stage, for rented property were very low. So averagely, the vacant possession value would be about 40 to 50%. And that depended upon the tenant you had in there and their life expectancy. And of course, if they were 90 with no children, the value might be much higher than that, but there were very few of those around. So you had, in effect, a lot of dealers going to auctions, buying up this rented stock at 40 or 45%. And then it was called winkling through incentive, but getting the tenants to agree to leave so they could do them up, sell them, or convert them into smaller units and let them out at market rents. Rachman came about in the 1950s, the late 50s really, and everybody knows that name, which is why I put it here. But he'd been very successful at doing that. Built a huge portfolio in London, about 100 mansion blocks that he'd purchased. He was successful in winkling lots of tenants out through incentive, but where they didn't want to leave, sometimes they'd use much heavier methods with threats to gain possession, and that's really where landlords got such a bad name. Rachman, for instance, he linked up with the Cray brothers in the end, and they ran one of his nightclubs for him. So through the 70s, we had that sort of thing going on. It was an interesting time. Later, we had, in 83, we had mortgage interest relief, which was something to help stimulate the market. MIRAS, as it was known. And it really allowed, when it came in, it was a £25,000 level for interest on mortgage with tax relief for that, allowed against that. In 1983, in the budget, Geoffrey Howe included couples who had felt hard done by. And so the mortgage relief for couples increased to 60,000. It went up to 30,000 in the budget. And then he introduced a couple, the pooling relief. So it went to 60,000. This, of course, in those times drove quite a demand for more property and people to buy. It also fueled insurance salesmen flogging endowments, and we sort of know where that ended up with all the mis-selling that went on. In 88, the Chancellor then, Nigel Lawson, announced that he, in his budget early in the year, that he was going to stop the pooling tax relief. And that, again, drove another spike in property sales right through to the end of August when it was pulled. So different things affect the property market in different ways. Gordon Brown, when he came in, abolished it in 2000. He thought it was a middle-class perk. He didn't like that at all. So that was one thing the government used to drive property values, or encouragement to purchase property at that time. The 80s in themselves were a very interesting period. There was lots of legislation around property. Protected shortholds came out in 1980, 81. And I think, Adam, you remember the protected shorthold tenancies pretty well.
It was absolutely bizarre. You'd agree to tenancy on behalf of your landlord client, and you then had to serve a notice on your tenant after agreeing the rent of exactly how they could get their rent reduced. I mean, it was great for tenants, but it wasn't great for landlords or property owners, for sure. It was bizarre, but I do remember them, yeah.
So there's a bit of legislation. That one didn't quite work. But also in the 80s, we saw a right to buy for council tenants, and that was a good time for tenants to buy very good properties, particularly in London. I used to do lots of valuation work for building societies at that stage, loaning out to tenants buying their council houses. We saw, more legislation around information being provided to tenants from landlords to make it more transparent who they were. Confidence in investors took off in the 80s. We saw buy-to-let and the finance for buy-to-let coming through, people seeing it as a pension alternative. So the most important act really that's governed everything that we know today is the 1988 Housing Act. It came into effect on the 15th of January 1989. It is definitely the most important act. It gave people certainty. It gave, in its simplest form, it gives us the tenancy agreement we have today. It gave tenants the right to live in a property undisturbed for an agreed period of time at an agreed rent. It gave the landlord the right to set the rent and also to evict the tenant or have a closing date on the tenancy. And that in itself brought certainty for landlords and encouraged landlords back into the market. And we saw the buy-to-let landlord evolve and the property market that we have today evolve. The stigma of renting began to diminish gradually, but it did. And eventually it went and it became quite a trendy thing. And we saw lots and lots of young people deciding that they'd rather live in a rented property than live at home. A transient population where people enable people to move with their jobs. So if you lived in Newcastle, you wanted to work in London, you could let your home in Newcastle quite safely and come and rent something in London or vice versa. So we saw a transient population, and I remember working in that time and seeing it happening in front of my eyes. So it was very interesting and quite stimulating for the economy. On the downside, we saw property prices increasing substantially, and we all know the story there about where it has forced the first-time buyer, where the average age was probably early 20s to about 35 or more today. So buy-to-let landlords have rather dominated that market, coming in with that sort of property and increasing prices. The other side of what happened through the 88 Housing Act is the more recent development of build to rent. And that is something that very highly promoted by the government, who like the idea of build to rent, with proper landlords, corporate landlords who have standards and can assure tenants of security of tenure, if you like, in longevity, rather than tenants being evicted because the landlord wants it back for their own occupation. Along with the change in the Housing Act and the law, the government decided quite rightly over a period of time, a gradual period of time, to put more regulation together for tenancies, to make it safer for tenants to live in and to improve the standard of properties that people lived in. So the first one that came in 88 was the furnishings fire safety regulations. I had to write it in full because I can't ever remember it. It's been updated several times, but it ensures that furnishings in properties are fire retardant. We had lots of burnouts in tenanted properties where furniture wasn't fire retardant. So since then we've had gas safety regulations where every year a new gas safety certificate should be issued. No property should ever be let without one. We had PAT testing, which is portable appliance testing. So electrical appliances had to be tested for every tenancy. And now this year we've got fixed wiring testing coming through. My belief, I've lobbied for a long time, for many years, on fixed wiring, because I've felt that that's a real danger, bigger danger almost than PAT, the portable appliances. But I've always felt there's a resistance to enforce that because it may have a bigger effect on the market. It comes in this year. Many properties that are let out are old, particularly in London, and their wiring may not be up to the standard. So it might spur on lots of works that have to be done to properties and cost quite a bit of money. We'll see. You had things like right to rent checks, EPCs. Last year, houses in multiple occupation, the legislation toughened up extremely on that. Every local authority, there are over 340 local authorities in the UK, has their own method of licensing an HMO. It makes it very difficult for agents or landlords to understand and know exactly what the licensing requirements are. But that's enforced now. It's a complicated bit of legislation and rather messy. It should be controlled in one place by one authority and give one rule for everybody, but it doesn't. We saw deposits protected for tenants, and again, it was something I was very keen to lobby for and initiated the tenancy deposit scheme as it is today. Tenants' deposits were abused, no doubt, and not returned as they should have been, so that now protects them. Legionella, that's something that people don't really pay too much attention about, but in properties where water sits not used for more than 3 or 4 weeks, you have Legionella, which is a killer disease, and people die of that every year. So there are checks for that now. I can go on. Tax reporting for agents became apparent that where agents collect rent, they have to now report to the revenue in order to avoid people, ducking out of paying their rent. There were guides for tenants, contractors' approval, transparency on fees has become more prevalent, which is good. And last year we saw the introduction of the tenant fee ban, which had a massive financial effect on agencies, helped tenants no end, and good for them, but was a difficult thing for agencies to swallow last year. What I put at the last comment I've made is the most complex thing in all of this is probably the people, not the legislation or regulation. People are always difficult to deal with.
I think also what this regulation brought in was take the right to rent checks. I mean, it was effectively estate agents being told they're now border control, passed a lot of responsibility to agents, and likewise with the tax reporting, the agents became liable for the tax if the forms weren't filled in. It's as simple as that. So the legislation is needed, it's good, but it has brought in a huge amount of responsibility to the agent, which often gets forgotten.
Agreed, yeah. And these are all good things, but yeah, they complicated the situation for agents. So the tenant fee ban, I did make a note of what fees are chargeable. I thought that might be a question, so I've written it down because I couldn't remember them all. But last time it came in, 1st of June it came in UK, and I think it's 1st September it came in for Wales. Tenant pays no fees, although they do have to pay, or they can pay a refundable deposit to secure a property, which is a sensible thing because if that wasn't the case and they weren't going to put money up front, the landlord might take many applications for a property. Some tenants would win and some would lose, which wouldn't be the right thing. That's capped at 1 week's rent. If a tenant wants to break a contract or his tenancy agreement and move out, then there's a cost of doing that, and the agent or landlord can charge for that. A default payment where a tenant doesn't pay his rent, and if there's a charge for any legal fees to recover from the tenant, and a refundable deposit, as we have for all security deposit, if you like, against damages, that's still payable by tenants. But again, it's refundable if there are no problems at the end.
I think the tenant ban had to come in though, because it was there was agents who would charge ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, ridiculous. And there were some agents who were charging in excess of £500 a tenant just to do the admin. So I think it was a good idea. Whether to take all the fees away, I think is questionable, and maybe they should have capped it. But certainly, they needed to do something with it, and I agree with that.
Well, you're right, Adam. I think that's correct. But yeah, why did it happen? It's because, I'll go to the next slide, that we had in the old days about 6,000 or 7,000. That's my guess at the number of agencies, and that grew through the 80s and 90s to 2000s to about 22,000 today. And that, in effect, squeezed, the competition meant that agents were charging lower and lower fees to landlords in particular. And agents then were having to pick up their fees another way, which is they were charging tenants. So that drove the tenant fee problem, if you like, to start with. But looking at agencies, I thought I'd just throw that out about agencies. And in the old days, when I first started, they were general practice, which meant they were professional firms governed by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. They did sales, they did lettings, they did management, auctions, land disputes, surveys, probate, commercial. So agents, my trial was really on a general practice basis. So I was a jack of all trades and probably none, but I knew a lot about a lot of things, and that's how agents were. There was no particular government regulation on agents. As I say, it was governed by the RICS and their code of practice, which kept most things in check. And on the whole, they were trusted. In the 80s, the late 80s, building societies, banks saw agency as a great way to start flogging financial products. And so they went out with their checkbooks, very big checkbooks, and bought loads of agencies to consolidate the market and enable them to sell their mortgages and financial services through agencies. It didn't really work, and they all got into a bit of a trouble through it. The effect, though, was that lots of the old partners and the people working in estate agents got paid lots of money, retired or had a few years off, and maybe came back to the market a bit later on, 2 or 3 years later. But a new a breed of agent was born, whereby it was hived into compartments, really. So you had survey departments and conveyancing departments or whatever, but you really had agents became sales agents only. They didn't really like the lettings and property management, which was too troublesome. So the focus became more hard sales technique. It lost the trust. As I said, there's about 22,000 agents today, many of whom are very professional, but not all. And it started to tarnish the name with so many people with so little experience coming into that world. Regulation is about to commence. I'm not sure that it will commence too quickly with Corona or with Brexit looming, but regulation of agents is on the government's agenda, but I'm not quite sure how quickly that will come through now. During the time we had stamp duty, and the most relevant, there was a change to stamp duty in 2003. It didn't make a big difference. It sort of leveled the playing field slightly, but the big increase in stamp came in 2016. Where it added a 3% burden or surcharge to people buying a second home or buy-to-let. And you can see from my slide the difference it made to those numbers. It also moved the threshold up to £300,000 for first-time buyers. When we look at the next slide, you can see the difference that made, particularly to first-time buyers, where at £300,000 they'd be paying £5,000 in stamp, but they wouldn't be if they were at 299,999. So it's going to save the first-time buyer a lot of money. For second home buyers and buy-to-lets, you can see the margin it made, the current increase for those people. So an extra tax on second homes, buy-to-let.
I think also it highlights the fact that if you're living in London in the southeast or in some of the more affluent cities, you definitely get targeted. You don't get the same benefits as the relief on the lower value properties.
No, true. So technology, I thought, well, this is a technical forum. It's fair to say that there wasn't much interest in technology, particularly for the residential market. And the systems that I was involved in or running for the business I was in were, in the early days, very basic. They were rent collection systems and weren't much more than that. So it was a question of people like myself, and there were many people like me in the industry, working with small cottage industry software houses to develop the software for residential. It's become much more interesting for people today, and it's exploding, and I'm sure through Corona this is really going to take off. But it really only covered the basics for many years and still does only cover the basics now.
So John, when I started my agency office in the late 80s, we had word processors. And I think we had some carbon paper floating around still. So technology at that stage was barely existed. Barely existed.
Yeah, right. I mean, the big change really in the market was Rightmove. And I remember I was privileged to be one of the people involved in setting Rightmove up. I would take no credit for it, but I was asked opinion about how to set things up on the rented side. But Rightmove, for people that may not know, initially was going to be called Doorknob, not quite the same ring as make the right move, make the right doorknob, doesn't quite hang together, and certainly wouldn't have got the Nobel Prize for doing that, would they? But Rightmove came along, it changed the property industry. I remember people I worked with saying, what the hell do you want a bloody computer for? But there you are, Rightmove, it tells its own story. Things are changing now. People want data, massive data, landlords, tenants, buyers, sellers. AI is coming through, which is going to save lots of cost. And particularly after Corona, it's going to be more of a focus than ever. Automation. We've got Zoom. We're doing a Zoom thing tonight, which I've never done a speech like this on Zoom before, but it's all the time now. I'm using Zoom all the time to talk to family and friends. Adam and I have meetings on Zoom.
Yep.
But Adam, you know, the blockchain thing, I thought you might want to interrupt here and talk about some of the stuff that's going on with blockchain and technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to reiterate, as you said it.
Adam, I just want to say this group is the Crypto Co Club, so a lot of the people here would know blockchain, so you don't have to dumb it down. You can actually go full out and explain. That
was just what I was about to say, Shahad. But basically, you know, I'm not a tech person. And I'm quite happy to stay that way, but I'm enjoying understanding from Shahad and what I've learned of how it can be applied. So my knowledge of blockchain, as Shahad intimated, is limited, and I know there are a lot of people out there who know a lot more about it than I do. But what I came into the whole Openbrix blockchain interest based on my experience as an agent. And as John said, I started as an independent back in the late 80s. John started in the 1880s, I think, if I got that right. But I was.
Thank you, Adam. Very kind.
I was in the 1980s, and yeah, there was zero technology. And I remember even when the internet came in, and one of the first portals arrived, I remember my colleague coming to me and saying, "Look, there's this great new portal called Find a Property that we need to be on." And the guy who designed it and did all the architecture, it was in one of the bed sits that one of my clients was renting out. So he was one of our tenants. I collected his rent. And I remember my colleague saying to me, we need to go on this. And I asked for it to be explained. And I said, look, this internet thing, it's never going to take off. Don't waste your time. So, you know, I don't come at this from a technical side. But what I've now learned is, and seen possibly how some of a centralized portal has perhaps taken advantage of the industry, that they capture the data, they capture users' data, they produced a fantastic product, but they're not bringing great value for money now to agents, because to go on some of these portals is extremely expensive. However, I can understand now where the blockchain can really revolutionize not just the portal industry, but the whole process. And one of the gripes agents have at the moment is that they don't have any control. And again, from an agent's perspective, being able to decentralize a portal and give agents the chance to control their data and use a platform going forward as part of a community was something that really interests me. So I do see that was my primary interest, and I now see how the rest of the processes can sit on the portal. For example, Openbrix, we've developed, or Shahad's developed something of great interest, which is giving tenants their own ID. It's a sovereign ID. At the moment, a tenant goes to an agency, and the agent will ask him for various documents, being passports and copies of bank statements, and it's quite intrusive. And of course, there's the right to rent checks. Well, we've developed on our platform a facility for the tenants to pre-populate their ID documents and their right to rent, and arrive at a tenancy already, if you arrive at an agency already pre-verified. And then every month when they pay their rent, this rent will be recognized, validated, and validated back to a tenant's own ledger. So they're going to have a record of every single rent payment they've paid, to whom, what date, how much, and this is kept by the tenant. So that very feature alone is now giving tenants the opportunity to say, look, this is who I am, and this is a mutable proof of the rent payments I've made for the last 20 months. And I think if that tenant then arrives at a new agency, with that information, that tenant then can be taken a lot more seriously. And the other thing we've been able to do is use that rent record. It's an option for tenants to have, to be able to have these rent recognised by the credit reference agencies, and thereby influencing and increasing their credit histories and their credit scores. So I think the technology is showing to me that the days of just being a listing portal, which is effectively a glorified online brochure, are over. I'm not saying it's going to change overnight. In fact, it won't change overnight, but I do see change coming. And then you've got the whole process of a sales process that can sit on a blockchain. And I know we've got someone from Countrywide watching this tonight, but it's being able to bring transparency to the sales process is something that we all benefit from. I mean, those of us who bought and sold over the years, you know, you rely on as an agent, we'd have a buyer, we'd have a vendor, and then we'd spent the next 4 months chasing between solicitors. You know, you phone up one and he says, yes, I'm waiting for a document from the other side. You'd phone up the other side, they'd call you back the following day and they say, no, I've already sent it. And you go back and forth, and the whole process has become so time consuming, and it hasn't changed. Technology has barely affected this. So I see the blockchain as a great way of improving that whole process, bringing transparency, bringing value, and speeding the whole process up. You know, for agents to be able to, involved in a chain, to be able to talk, solicitors and buyers and vendors and landlords and tenants be able to interact on a simple platform with transparency can only be a good thing for the whole industry. So yes, I'm excited about what blockchain can bring.
Well, security of data, isn't it? And it's ownership of your own data rather than casting it off to somebody else. You don't really know who it is and what they're doing with it. It's those things. So.
Absolutely. And at the moment, the data is you know, to a small independent agency, you know, it costs an awful lot of money to go on Rightmove. And you've explained, John, how this industry has grown and how it's sort of been held back, if you like, by endless changes to legislation and regulations. I mean, it's at one stage, it seemed to be every couple of months, some new regulation would come in, your documentation would have to change, your processes would have to change. And I think that's what's held back some of the technology. And a lot of change happens for good reason. A lot of it is convoluted. And I remember the days when HIPs came in, the house information packs, home information packs, and it was a great idea. In theory, what it was able to do was to be able to, a vendor to be able to put their property on the market with all the documentation they needed for the sale up front, ready to go. That's a good idea. But in practice, it took a long time to prepare a property for sale. And it wasn't, you couldn't just instruct an agent and say, can you put the property on the market tomorrow? But with the new digitalization, you know, this can happen a lot sooner. And of course, it means that transactions can therefore happen a lot quicker without the hassle.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Adam. So slightly moving on from technology, I know, Eric, you said let's sort of look at the future. But I thought before we look at the future, I just sort of looked at a couple of recessions we've had, and one in 1989/90, if you like, to 93, was fueled by an overheated property market, interest rates spiraling up to 12–14%. People couldn't afford their repayments. You had negative equity, and I remember those days very well, where you could borrow 105% mortgage against property because the prices were going up so quickly.
I remember I had 125% mortgage once. Yeah,
there you are, right. Risky, but it was horrific, and it affected the property market very badly. It knocked people's confidence. People were just chucking keys back at building societies. Take it back. I don't want to know. Building societies repossessed lots. I was involved in that side of the business at that time. Where they repossessed, they put them into business expansion schemes, did them up and let them out. And again, it helped that transient, youthful, sort of tenanted occupation, and gave people that didn't want to buy would rent, and it gave them that confidence back. As I say, it was not quite the same as we have today, but you might get some of these influences coming back in the future. In 2007, at the very end of it, or 2008 really, we had a recession. It's a global banking meltdown pretty much. We had a double dip in that recession. A falling lending, consumer confidence, falling exports, falling house prices. So you can see that those two things, and because I was doing this talk, I had to look at them. I'm not an expert, I'm not an economist, and I don't really understand too much about it, but you can look at the facts and how they bear and what they might bring for the future, or what we might learn for the future. As a matter of interest, and no more than that, I just looked at house price increases. So between the two recessions that I spoke about, the one in '89, where it's the peak values, and then between 2007, where it dropped off again, house prices had risen by 200%, which is an incredible sort of increase. Between those two recessions, between the last recession in 2007 and 2020 this year, if you take it from the peak before the recession hit, prices have only gone up 18%. So it's not been a massive increase since 2007. If you take it from the end of that recession in 2009, they've gone up 34% since it finished. So that spin puts more value on the increase. And if you look at the overall, since that first recession in '89 and today, they've gone up 254%. So quite massive increases there. Looking at a recession recovery, I'm not going to go through all the charts, but pretty much you can see the last one we had, the red line at the bottom, sort of dipped down pretty low. It dipped down again, but it lasted quite a while. And anyway, so I won't go any more about that, but also looked at the job losses. And if you look at this slide, the red line again is about job losses in the last recession. It was longer, deeper, and more of them. So I just worry about what we're going to come into after the lockdown and how it's going to pan out.
Just to clarify that, that red line was probably me being too slow to analyse. That current red line, was that the last recession or was that this one?
Yeah, the last recession.
Last one.
Okay, not the coronavirus.
No, the last. So it was deeper and lasted longer, that one. So Corona, how will it affect us? We've got closed shops and we're all worried what it's going to do to house prices, I suppose, and the economy in general. A couple of things that struck me is that tenants particularly are going to be at home through the lockdown. There is likely to be more damage and wear and tear on properties. There will be, people can't pay arrears of rent and arrears of mortgage, so you're going to have more bills for people to face when they come out of this. There's going to be a question about, do you buy or do you rent? So people won't know, and maybe they'll be cautious about buying again. Rented, not so much of a commitment. And Erica, before we started, you referred to Airbnb, which was growing. I don't really understand, I don't really have any much data on Airbnb, but anecdotally, everybody was talking about it. It was growing as an entity and people were renting through Airbnb. I'm just not sure with COVID how safe people will feel in the future renting through Airbnb, and who's been in before and how clean is it. So it may have a slowdown on that Airbnb sort of growth that was going on.
Yeah.
What next? So I sort of tried to dice. I don't know if Adam, have you got anything to mention there?
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a very good point. It leads us on to the same reason that, people might be a little bit worried about going into restaurants and bars, moving in and spending a weekend in an apartment where you don't know who was in there before, I think could be an issue. But I also had a slight issue with the extreme growth of B&B. I think the concept is really good, but it was beginning to eat into the private rented sector, and where those properties suffer from all that regulation that you've gone through for good reasons on the whole.
Yeah.
The Airbnb market doesn't have any of those regulations. So is the electrical wiring sensible? Is there an enforceable gas check being done on the property? There's all sorts of compliance issues that with Airbnb were not necessarily being covered, or certainly not being policed.
True, very true. Thank you. Yeah. So, what next? And I sort of put it into two headings. One is probably speculation, assumption. One is probably more for certain. You know, everybody's had a chance to look through those. So people are going to be de-risking their life, but how far do we go and what do we do about this? You know, yesterday's announcement, today's announcement probably confused things a little bit more than it has clarified them. Social distancing testing is going to be here for a long time. I hope there's going to be a vaccine that's credible and works, which will severely help us. How are we going to feel about working in an office? That's going to be a difficult one. London, we talked earlier on about people moving to towns and not the cities. The tube, I don't know how people will feel about going on a tube. And you've got things like Prep, which everybody uses. I mean, I had my breakfast when I was in London, staying in London every week. I'd have breakfast in Prep. I'm not sure as I would now. So it's going to have a knock-on effect. The high street confidence. I mean, if you buy a pair of shoes, you've got to try them on. And you're going to be wondering who's put them on before you, or a suit, or whatever you buy in the shops. You're going to touch it and you're going to think twice about it. So it's going to have an effect in shops, travel abroad, unemployment rates and redundancies when we come out of this because of efficiencies through technology, but also businesses, not being there that were there before. So there's going to be that sort of area of caution and reality in the world. How quickly will the economy return? That's anybody's guess. People talk about a V-shaped recession, and some, those slides I've looked at, you think it may not be that V-shaped. Will be a delayed reaction. Government support at the moment, which is incredible with support, but how long will that last? I mean, when they say you can go back to work and they won't pay for furloughing anymore, that may have quite an effect on the economy and people's lives. And the national debt. So I just thought about a few things. I mean, we all know these things. The things you can almost guarantee, though, is there'll be arrears and debt for everybody, for many, many people. Technology will advance at a faster rate than it was advancing beforehand because there'll be a desire to work from home and to increase efficiency. There'll be less high street, less agents on the high street. We'll start with low interest rates, but will they stay there? Your working from home is going to grow. People have enjoyed it. People have seen the benefits of working from home. And I tend to think that new build will have to accommodate working from home. And any developers now will think, do I want to build 3-bedroom flats and not 2-bedroom or 1-bedrooms? Will people want a 1-bedroom if they're going to be locked up in the future or work from home? So I think it will change the builders and people's views about new development and outside space.
I have a feeling that the commercial market is going to take a bit of a hit because I think we were discussing this before, that I think, talking not just to property businesses, lots of businesses are beginning to question why they need as much commercial space when they've worked out that a lot of people can work from home for a period of time. Maybe they don't need as much commercial space anymore. And what will happen to the commercial market in London? And I have a view there's going to be a lot of vacancy. What will happen to that? Will that be turned into residential under permitted development laws? I think possibly. Add that to the ever-growing list of new builds that are sitting, certainly as you come into Waterloo after Vauxhall, these endless, huge high-rise blocks of residential developments that are just sitting there empty because foreign money's bought them, are just sitting on them. They have no interest to rent them out. Don't want to sell them yet. They've just parked the money. So I just wonder what's going to happen to the London market, because I agree. I think a lot of people are going to, it's a movement. I think people will move out of London and out of the cities, perhaps to perhaps slightly more comfortable towns and villages. I do see that happening. What will happen to the London market then? Because whatever happens in the London market will generally creep out to the rest of the country. And if that means price drops, could that be a good thing?
For the consumer, probably yes. For the pension funds, probably no.
Just on that, I just wanted to add, I remember specifically Adam did say that once we come out of our MVP, he wants an office in London so we can get our team together and move on. Adam has since changed his mind. So I'm assuming there's many other CEOs similar to Adam who are also going to change their minds, because it happened to Openbrix. It will happen, I'm sure, to others.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think you're right, Chad. Yeah, it will definitely. So yeah, I think, it's a very good point, Adam. It's absolutely spot on that. One of the other things, I think people care more about the environment. I think people have enjoyed the environment much more with less traffic and less airplanes and less pollution. So One thing is there's always going to be a strong demand for property and people moving up the ladder and moving and having space. So I don't think demand will diminish completely. It will still be there and it will be quite strong. The other thing that I haven't mentioned and we shouldn't mention, and I'm not going to talk about, is Brexit. That's coming up this year and that's going to be negotiated. So that's another thing to throw in the mix. Just briefly, well, I'll go to this slide because I actually put a slide in about commercial to residential. And I completely agree with you, Adam. The points you've made there are absolutely spot on. So I think people will work from home much more and commercial will be turned into residential going forward. It'll have to be. Back to this, the housing sales market. What's going to happen to the loan to value ratios? Will building societies, banks still look at the same sort of lending ratios and income ratios? I'm not sure. I think they'll be more cautious. The employment and the economy will have an effect on things that go through. I mean, we hope sincerely there's not a second spike. If there is, that will be very serious, I think, for everybody. Confidence in general, I think, will be knocked, and I think it will maybe ease back a little bit. Some of the people, Rightmove, their report recently has said that 94% of those people currently in a chain intend to carry on with that chain. Half of those people immediately and half of them at a slower pace, but we'll just have to wait and see. I think the longer it goes on, the less that might be the case. Yeah. Buy to let, it's a good pension alternative, and we'll see what happens to pension funds for the future. On a practical basis, viewings to buy or let properties are going to be much more difficult. So I think technology will kick in there, or very serious sort of health practices. Market appraisals, taking properties on, will have to change. And I know that one of the companies we've been talking to are developing technology that they can leave on the doorstep for the owners to go around, put their own details and videos and floor plans together, and then be collected to take back. So the valuations and take-ons of properties can be done remotely. There'll be more of that. As I said, developers will create more space and working space for the property market. We've talked about the residential. The rental market, I sort of guess that's going to come back fairly quickly. I think there'll be a bit of pent-up demand and people want to move there. You'll definitely have arrears. I mentioned dilapidations. I think you might have more of an issue with settling deposits and dilapidations. Evictions, there will be some of those coming through where people haven't paid rent and landlords will want them out. They'll see it as a good opportunity to get rid of people and go back to the market. Instantly, we've seen a shortage of property available to rent, and it has pushed rental prices up. So instantly we've seen a rise in rental prices, but I don't think that will be a long-term thing. I think that will be just a very short-term thing until the market stabilizes again. Many tenants that are young and living alone or sharing, I reckon, will want to go back home and live with their parents. They'll see that as an easier, safer, cheaper option. Will you get landlords selling? Will the bubble, burst for buy-to-let? Will landlords be looking, for bargains on buy-to-rent, buy-to-let? So the build-to-rent market will stay with us. There'll be more technology, and as I say, demands for houses are not flat.
I really see the technology as being something that I've seen just in the last 8 weeks with some of our integrations with Openbrix. Take the just video viewing, for example. We've all seen it before, but the new versions are really impressive. You can literally have a walk through an apartment. You're having a look on the floor plan at the same time. You see your dot move around, and I think that's very exciting. And even there's some aspects of people doing live viewings on screen, log into, and we've experienced that as well. It's very exciting, the new tech coming in.
Indeed. So I put this slide in. There's so much information around at the moment and so many different opinions. It's what to take on board and what not to take on board. This one, conclusion, it's here to stay, coronavirus, washing your hands, social distancing, herd immunity, maybe. We're going to move into that, I think, with what's going on, which will be a very difficult thing for us to cope with. It's lives versus economy. I think that's what we're facing, and it's a difficult equation to balance that one, although my view is it's lives all the way through. I'd rather be alive as a poor man than a dead rich man. So jobs at risk and unemployment, there'll be caution because of that. Some of the things we talked about, personal debt, GDP, forecasts that are dropping 13%, well, who knows? And I think it, very likely, I think they're talking about 30% drop so far, but that's because we're shut down. But an overall figure. So government help for businesses is not long term, it won't be forever, so that will have a knock-on effect in the future, and it's really how you fund this stuff. We're likely to have a recession, there are likely to be higher taxes, interest rates low at the moment, but will they be forever, and how does the government fund what's going on?
I hope you guys can see how convoluted it's been. It's been very hard to bring technology in, and I think, as we were discussing at the beginning, it's been marching steadily forward, but I do think the coronavirus has brought a lot of this to a head now, and I think the property industry, particularly the estate agents, are seeing that they will have to adapt, and their appetite to understand technology now has never been higher. And for those of people listening who are involved in any form of prop tech, you're in a good place at the moment, and get your products out, because we're seeing the value. We really are. And I, for one, as somebody who's I'm loving what this can do now. I see huge opportunities for the property industry, certainly.
I would apologise for rattling through those slides, but I had a bit of time at home to put them together.
Great, that was absolutely amazing. I learned so much. That was so interesting, both of you guys, and I've had lots of messages of people just saying, excellent. A slightly cheeky David Henderson is asking, I'm going to rephrase your question, David. What year was the 20p pint?
20p pint, yeah, very cheeky. So I can tell you that I'll look it up, I have it down here. It was 1970.
1970, okay. And next question.
With him, that's for sure.
Sorry?
I'm not going to go out drinking with him, that's for sure.
Well, I've got the self-sovereign ID system that you mentioned for Openbrix is a great idea. Are all agents prepared and happy to use that system?
Well, I think the ones we've spoken to, they like the idea because it's going to save them some admin time. But I think, so the feedback so far is yes. Will all agents like it? I don't know, but I'm always, as an agent, that sometimes it took me a while to understand the value of technology and what it could bring. So I think the answer is I think it's a good idea. I love the fact that it gives tenants some empowerment for a chance to say, look, I've already been verified. You don't need to see my documents. I've got government verification, job done. And by the way, here's my rent record.
And on that move, do you think it will be that tenants will lead it, that tenants will just go to the agents that most offer that, and it will become where the young, cool, trendy, techno-friendly tenants go to?
Without a doubt, Erica, the tenants will lead that one. We spoke to the Students' Union. They loved it. They want it. It wouldn't be a cost to agents. It would simply be a benefit for all students, all tenants to have this. It's their own record. It saves time for agents. It will save time for agents. Some of the corporates that we've spoken to, in fact, some of the major landlords we've spoken to, absolutely think it's a wonderful idea. So that one is a runner. Yeah.
And even if you could introduce it, butting in, but for students, I mean, probably like me, dad's paid for most rent. But if it's something like tenant left the property in good condition, tenant was respectful, tenant cleaned up after themselves.
And if the tenant has been paying a rent on time and in full for the last 20 odd months, then that doesn't have to be a guarantor on his next tenancy.
Maybe, yeah. Interesting, thank you. If the general plan is basically to shake up Rightmove and go to...
Well, yes, it is. It is there, but we can't just be another listing portal. At the moment, Rightmove and Zoopla are on the market, who came up with a fantastic, groundbreaking invention. Like all technology, things adapt and things have to evolve. And I personally believe any portal who now just wants to be a listing portal, to snatch all the data and capture all the data it can, sell it on for huge amounts of money, and then charge the agent a huge sum of money just for the privilege, and offer nothing back. I think those days are over. And I'm not saying Rightmove are going to disappear overnight, because they're still a household name. But I think agents are really wanting one of the new challenges to come up with something good, but they don't want to empower a Rightmove version 2. So that's why I believe at Openbrix, when we're saying, look, we're building a public community portal where the power is decentralized to the agent community, that's why I think we're giving them something fundamentally that they want.
I mean, it's fair to say, Adam, that we may not have seen knocking Rightmove off the top perch, but many of the agents, many hundreds of agents have seen the Openbrix as an absolute option to go to. And it's momentum substantially, hasn't it?
We've been carefully building up relations with agents over the last year. And some of you may be aware that during the early days of the lockdown, Rightmove made an offering of a 75% deferral of their fees, which went down like a ton of bricks. I was going to say something about it.
Why that?
Well, that was their offering when basically the whole market comes to a standstill. Viewings can't be done. Nothing.
So they're charging 25% instead of 0.
No, they just said we'll defer 75%, only deferring.
Right.
Giving it away. And it was Rightmove's Ratner moment, actually, and it backfired. And there's been various movements within the industry, Facebook groups, all obviously rather upset with it, and they're in the thousands now. Together, there's a few groups, and there's well over 3,000 agents now join, and we've been in touch with them all, and they want to support us. So yeah, but that's going to be up to us. We've got to deliver. We've got to deliver a product that they like. And bring value for in other areas, like we're trying to do with the tenants and with the sale process, and so yeah.
Did Rightmove renege on that in the end and offer it to them sort of for free for now?
They did, yes, you're absolutely right. They then did turn around and make a much more sensible offering, but the damage was kind of already done, and I think and in fact, recently they've, in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, they've come back and in response to the sort of Rightmove groups, they've said, well, we're not going to make any decision now, so that's it. And they've made some gesture that they're going to spend more money on the marketing, which of course is trying to attract the end user, which is part of it, but they want to further they're investing their money into making the end user more reliant on Rightmove, and that doesn't help the agent.
The transparency that you're offering is a great way ahead. And if you see the more traditional agencies, and I'm guessing by that the ones that offer the traditional shocking levels of customer service, going by the wayside with the new technologies, creating a whole new agency perception.
As I've said, I think it's clear, and history proves this, one has to adapt or you lose out. And any agency that doesn't want to adapt and wants to stick to quill pens and carbon paper and not invest in technology, I think will lose out. And I think when we come out of this recession, I shouldn't say recession, just COVID, I think there will be a V. I think there will be a bounce back. How high that V goes, I don't know, but I believe that there's plenty of pent up willingness to move, which will be sort of countered by people's worry on their jobs. And I think that will hopefully businesses across the UK in all industries will improve their tech, things will settle down, and then hopefully we march on, but it will take time.
And as you mentioned, there will be more of the build to rent and the sort of the property developers building more sort of villages almost for people to live in instead of more individual landlords. Do you think they might just form their own agencies and just sort of bypass the estate agent model altogether, because the property developers sometimes have some of the newer technologies for viewings and for remote access and so forth?
Some already do that, and some also work with agents, and I don't see that really changing. We've offered to work with the build to rents, and they like the tenant product that the ID and the rent record and the rental history option, credit history option. I can't see their relationship, the build to rent landlord's relationship with agents, altering much. I think that it's a nice working relationship. They need, in most cases, they need a bit of a boost from agent help, and I can't see that changing.
Okay, no, thank
I
you.
think at this stage, Erica, where there are fewer build to rent developments, it's easier for those. Excuse me, easier for those developers. easier for those people to rent themselves. I have to come back to you on this. So it's easier for those developers to let them out themselves. But as the developments increase and there's more competition, they'll need agents more than they do now.
Is asking a question which Shahad actually might be keen to interject and answer, as well as you both. But the question is that DLT is by definition able to remove the need for intermediaries, but it appears that Openbrix is planning to use the technology to prolong the use of intermediaries, i.e. by partnering with agents. And will this not be superseded by DLT that puts landlords in direct contact with tenants with no requirement for agents? I mean, my feeling is on that, having been both a landlord and a tenant, that I couldn't imagine anything worse on either side, to have direct relationships between landlords and tenants. But
I agree, and we just showed you the mountain of regulation and compliance, the legalities and complexities of the letting market. I honestly, I don't see that landlords wanting to do this direct. I really don't. I mean, there are some, of course there are, and there may be a growing number, but the majority haven't got a clue. And I mean that with respect. They don't know, and why should they? The regulations new compliance seems to change every few months. Agents are insured and trained to deal with this.
what changes do you think blockchain will have on the legal aspects of conveyancing and letting?
Well, I think on the conveyancing side, as I intimated, I think it's going to give an opportunity for the procedure to become, firstly, and very importantly, far more transparent and swifter. I think the whole process can be simplified. I think we can all agree right now the current system, the current traditional conveyancing system, it hasn't moved on in how many years? I mean, literally ever since I've been doing property, since the late 80s. Probably goes back to the 1700s, where John might remember it, but it certainly hasn't changed. Like the other day, this is true, I actually went to a solicitor. It's a public notary, but he was a conveyancer, and he spent half an hour. It was a bit like the scene from Love Actually, when Rowan Atkinson's putting the bits into the bag. And he spent ages sewing this tenancy, this document, sewing it and looking at me, getting my approval, and then stamping it. And this thing took half an hour. I was sitting next to my wife, looking at her, thinking, our car park's going to run out. You know, we've got to go. And this guy just took forever. And he was using an old stamp, you know, one of those. It was unbelievable. And I don't think the process has moved on. So with the blockchain, I think become a much swifter mechanism, and it will be far more transparent.
I mean, with the blockchain, you'll be able to link up there's the lawyers for buyers and sellers, the buyers and sellers themselves, the agents, surveyors, the lenders, and they can all communicate on a small group. And I think that will create a lot speedier transaction going forward. Yeah.
No, thank you. And there's a few just thank yous, and one chap asking if you might be able to share your email addresses, or do you have any contact details that I would be able to share on a follow-up email? Is that email or LinkedIn profiles or anything?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, later. I'll send a follow-up email to everybody. A few people have asked about if slides will be shared, so if that's okay to share those,
sure.
John, and there'll also be a recording of this which will be sent out, not today, but very soon to all attendees. And like other platforms, it says on your how it works section of the website that you can't raise prices or sell data that was not agreed upon by the majority of your community members, that the UK agents will form the community, and how that would work in practice about situations where there is a genuine disagreement on pricing. But my feeling is the disagreement on pricing, would that not be related to the property price as opposed to your actual, the amount that you charge agents? Is that section referring to what you're charging to agents?
I think it's I think what the question means is what we're charging the agents. So we've set out, rather than, I mean, with the other portals, for example, whilst they charge, I mean, anything from, I would say an average is around £2,500 a month to, I know 3 agencies in the UK who are not like hubs like Openbrix, who are paying over 10 grand a month just to list property.
Rightmove.
Yeah.
Gosh.
So we're offering a monthly subscription based on £100. Now, and when people say to me, well, you know, why are you charging so little? We want to be transparent. we're advocating transparency. All I want to do is create a public community portal for agents to use, and our job at Openbrix is merely to be the caretakers. We're the garden maintenance team. We're here to maintain it, look after it. The money we want to earn our monthly road tax. That's it. That's all we want to do. If we set up partnership deals with tenant entity offerings, we want to maximize the commission directly to the agents and not take cuts. There are some other portals out there that will not just sell the data and charge you for it, but they'll also take commissions in other forms of partnership arrangements, and we don't want to do that.
Do you have to pay costs of staff? What is so different from your cost model that allows you to sell at such a low cost?
Oh, I like this question. So because, again, I'm just comparing it to another, let's say one of the other portals, them being centralized, they have a huge, great big server, massive amounts of sales staff, tech teams, backup sites, everything, number of servers. Well, the reason why we're different, and fundamentally those are all shareholder and investor-led entities, we're decentralized, where reason why we are cheaper is because the data and the management of that data and the backup of that data and the running costs of that data and the electricity of running all those is all housed by the agent's community servers, not mine. So if an agent's server goes down, I don't have to repair it. It's not down to me. It's not my portal. Mm-hmm. I'm just running a community portal. So the agents effectively form the community, and they're paying for those. So why should I charge them for it?
No. You mentioned rental arrears and trends about people looking to move outside of London. Has that already happened with rental arrears due to coronavirus, or is that what is expected?
Well, there's no data on the rental arrears. It's too early, but I'm sure that's happening. As far as people looking outside of cities, that's only a Rightmove survey that was carried out, or some data from Rightmove that I read at the end of last week, saying that there has been a shift and more traffic looking at smaller towns than there has been in the past, and less traffic looking at cities than there has been in the past. So some of it is anecdotal and speculation, some of it is fact from Rightmove.
And I know you deal with residential primarily. Have you any thoughts about WeWork or what might happen?
I think that will be that will come into it. I mean, it was already taking off, and I think that really will, because that's the way people look at renting space on a limited basis for what they need when they need it. So yeah, I see that being more prevalent. It will be in shop front. Shops will be taken over. They'll knock shops through, make it nice space with big windows, people to sit in. You'll be at a distance, have great technology. I think that's part of the future, a big part of the future.
Okay. Interesting. One person is asking if one can pay your Openbrix monthly fee in Bitcoin.
Well, we hope once we get the FCA guidelines and approval, that's something that hopefully will happen. Yes, it is on the radar, but the FCA were quite clear that I mean they haven't even set the agenda yet. They're still working out their own guidelines. That's certainly on the radar.
You said there was data about people looking outside of London.
Yeah, well, Rightmove, their latest sort of survey explains that they're getting far more traffic and hits looking at smaller towns than they normally do.
Okay.
Less traffic and hits looking at cities, major cities. So they're recognising a shift of people just researching really at that stage, where they're going to go and look, and that's indicative of what's going on at the moment, I think.
Are people actually viewing and stuff like that? I mean, is that even legal at the moment?
Well, not really. There are some virtual viewings going on, and I know some of the build to rent people have quite sophisticated technology which allows some of that to happen. You know, some of the build to rent people have actually can accommodate moving in remotely by allowing access through electronic doors, and so they've allowed that to happen. So but it's minimal. It's only with some of these high-tech buildings now.
But is that going to be much more that, do you think that will be more of a trend, that people will go to those sort of self-contained complexes like that, maybe where they've got their own things on site, as opposed to renting off individual landlords or agents that aren't as advanced?
Yeah, I do. I think that's the trend is beginning to pick up, and they're building that in that way now. So the major sort of landlords are already taking that view, building that way, putting more cost in, more resource in, developing these estates, if you like, or mini villages or big villages.
With everything included in it.
Yeah, shopping, leisure, space to go and sit. Not so many car parking spaces. They're accounting for fewer cars, but more bikes,
right?
Pedestrian areas, more outside areas. And I think this will definitely spur that side of the market on. Yeah, without doubt.
But you have to remember, we've still got a huge majority of the stock are going to be based on ordinary, for want of a better word. But yeah, the sort of the special bespoke landlord packages now that the build to rents are bringing through are very sophisticated.
Yeah,
really good. Yeah, I mean, particularly for the younger lot.
Yeah, I can definitely, especially if one's going into work or into the city less, I can really see the appeal of living in a nice sort of community where you've got your gym on site, you've got your everything that you need there.
Yeah, there's definitely a market for it, 100%.
And I know I touched on this with John, but the Airbnb, what the newspapers are calling the Airbnb apocalypse. Is it true that there's now 45% more properties on from Airbnb? Is that true?
Well, I'll take your word for it being.
Well, I mean, I read this in the newspaper, so.
No. I mean, the numbers I don't know, but I've actually got a little caption in one of my slides about Airbnb because it was exploding before the lockdown.
Okay.
And using it so much more. And my view is, will people use it so much in the future? Because you're going to stay in an apartment or a flat or a house or a room that you don't know whether someone's been there before, how it's been cleaned. It's going to be difficult. And I think until that stabilizes, people won't know. Certainly there was a real rush for Airbnb, and that was significant.
There was a rush for Airbnb. What do you mean? In what way?
So as people were sort of seeing that as a great way of making money and actually using their own properties. So,
right. Yeah.
So much more and more investment in that side. People buying buildings they could use as Airbnbs, short stays, definitely.
But I mean, it might also be that not straight away, but especially if people are maybe moving further out and then going into London just a couple of days a week, that they just get an Airbnb for 2 nights during the week, for example.
Indeed. When I was
but they're not going to have the same budgets, I guess, because they're going to be thinking, I want this property every Monday and Tuesday night, or.
Yeah, I think it's, but some of the people I was working with in London were, and lived remotely, were travelling in and staying a couple of nights in Airbnbs or similar, not hotels. So there is that trend because you can self-cater, you can stay in, you can watch TV, you can cook yourself something. I preferred the hotel when I was actually travelling in and out because things are done for you, if you like.
Yeah.
It's much easier to check in, it's much less stress. And just go out for a meal in the evening. But there were people I worked with doing Airbnb stuff.
No, yeah, interesting. I was just wondering how much that would crash the Airbnbs now, because if they're all sort of owners, that might just force their properties onto the market, if that would just really crash the normal rental market.
It was causing a lot of angst from the agent perspective because they were getting around all sorts of compliance issues that agents and landlords under the PRS had to comply to.
What's PRS?
Private renter sector.
Okay.
But indeed the likes of the build to rent market, they're all very compliant. They have to be. Airbnb seem to be sort of getting away with quite a lot. And I suspect that had it carried on growing, legislation would have been brought into the Airbnb market for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I thought about that. And is that just the main cities that are being affected by that? Presumably there aren't any Airbnbs in, I don't know, some of the smaller towns.
There's probably not as many. There might be a few, but you're right. It's the cities that were benefiting from that. Although I really haven't looked at that side or the data on that side to be able to comment, but I guess that'd be correct.
Just someone I spoke to, actually, it was someone Shah had introduced me to, Lou Fletcher. I don't know if you also know her. She's a friend of Shahad's and writes about property for some of the newspapers and
an event the other day that we were exhibiting in before the lockdown. It was the Federation of Independent Agents. We did a talk for them.
Okay, but she said that most or the majority or something of Airbnbs, at least in London, that it's multi-owners. So they're people whose literally their whole income depends on the Airbnb.
Wow.
So they might end up having problems.
Yeah. Like what, having a share in...
No. So where instead of the Airbnb where it's just you're renting out your spare room, or maybe you're renting out your spare flat, it's people who effectively did like a, what was the term? Rent to rent. So they would go to landlords and guarantee them rent for 3 years, for example, and then sublet them out.
Yeah, well, that will be against the terms of their tenancy contract for sure.
Right.
And
unless they agree it beforehand, I guess. Because there are schemes like that. Landlords do let out to, say, for instance, local authorities. They'll buy it.
Guaranteed rent for X amount of time.
Yeah, to the local authority, and then the local authority put tenants in. So it sort of exists in one form already.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see that with Airbnb. But they'd have to declare their interest. I mean, most of them probably wouldn't. Adam and I are probably familiar with the old setup where people rented something and then sublet it for a profit without declaring it, which wasn't legal.
Right. But how would that have happened without something like Airbnb or so? Like to sublet it? Were there other just...
You're the tenant. You're the landlord. I'm the tenant. You agree to rent me the property and we agree a price. It's £1,000 a month. And I'm happy to say, yeah, I'll pay that, no problem. And what I then do is I go and then sublet it out and get £1,200 a month and make a small profit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Share us in there and get £2,000 a month. But yeah, that sort of thing has happened.
Interesting. How's Openbrix doing in this time? Are you just working on the tech and getting everything ready?
The tech is, as you'll know, is ever changing.
Sure.
Constant animal. But yeah, no, we've launched and onboarding agents. We're getting a lot of really positive feedback. And it's interesting because a year ago when I joined, starting to talk about blockchain, was the agent's eyes would glaze over. They thought that meant was something to do with Bitcoin. Literally, agents are good at selling and letting houses. And there's a lot of compliance they have to, understand and comply with. And it was just, it was a word that just I could see their eyes when I talked to them. And now they're beginning to get it, and they understand about decentralizing it, and they can share the control among the community, and they're beginning to get it, and it's very positive. We're getting some really positive feedback.
Okay, interesting. And presumably now, would be the best time to get them on. I had this conversation with Shahad, who thought I was being a little bit mean of taking advantage of them, but I was just thinking, if there's so many agents who are maybe furloughing or having to get rid of people because they can't afford to keep Linda or whatever in the back office on, surely now is the time to effectively be replacing some of those redundant people. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh in saying that.
I know, there's no question agents are having to look at their business models themselves from agent, and they're looking at costs, and the costs of the current portals are extremely high, and it's they're now questioning the value. So to someone like us who can bring in a much fairer pricing structure and be able to pass the control, if you like, to a community, and not gleefully raise our prices whenever we like. Something that agents are beginning to get on board with. So yeah, it is sad to say a good time for us.
Sure.
We're making
but the thing is, it's only, all of this automation was always going to happen. This has just accelerated a few things.
It's definitely going to accelerate things, for sure.
Yeah.
Will you see as many agents on the high street going forward? They'll all be thinking, do I need all those branches?
Right.
Should I have more of a hub set up, people working from home? That's more of an American model, but they will be thinking that because they'll think, well, actually, it's with Zoom and with technology, it's much easier, less expensive. So I think it will force lots of issues, particularly tech. Tech will explode now, and it's not been very high profile for the property industry industry. So you can see that taking off. I mean, tech is there now, and people are interested in the property industry now, particularly the residential market, which never had that much take up. So yeah, things will change without a doubt.
Do you think a lot of the agents will go, or they'll survive?
I think there'll be far fewer agents. Not all will survive. You've had a tenant fee ban. It's hit fees coming through that way. Sales more of the cream, and the number of transactions this year will be substantially reduced. I reckon confidence in the market will be reduced, so you will see agents go.
Okay.
There's too many. There's already too many. And over the next few years, we'll get regulation coming in, which will deter some as well.
You said there was data about people looking outside of London.
Yeah, well, Rightmove, their latest sort of survey explains that they're getting far more traffic and hits looking at smaller towns than they normally do.
Okay.
Less traffic and hits looking at cities, major cities. So they're recognising a shift of people just researching really at that stage, where they're going to go and look, and that's indicative of what's going on at the moment, I think.
Are people actually viewing and stuff like that? I mean, is that even legal at the moment?
Well, not really. There are some virtual viewings going on, and I know some of the build to rent people have quite sophisticated technology which allows some of that to happen. Some of the build to rent people have actually can accommodate moving in remotely by allowing access through electronic doors, and so they've allowed that to happen. So, but it's minimal. It's only with some of these high-tech buildings now.
But is that going to be much more that, do you think that will be more of a trend, that people will go to those sort of self-contained complexes like that, maybe where they've got their own things on site, as opposed to renting off individual landlords or agents that aren't as advanced?
Yeah, I do. I think that's the trend is beginning to pick up, and they're building that in that way now. So the major sort of landlords are already taking that view, building that way, putting more cost in, more resource in, developing these estates, if you like, or mini villages or big villages.
With everything included in it.
Shopping, leisure, space to go and sit. Not so many car parking spaces. They're accounting for fewer cars, but more bikes.
Right.
Pedestrian areas, more outside areas, and I think this will definitely spur that side of the market on. Yeah, without doubt.
But you have to remember, we've still got a huge majority of the stock are going to be based on ordinary, for want of a better word. But yeah, the sort of the special bespoke landlord packages now that the build to rents are bringing through are very sophisticated.
Yeah.
Really good, yeah. I mean, particularly for the younger lot.
Yeah, I can definitely, especially if one's going into work or into the city less, I can really see the appeal of living in a nice sort of community where you've got your gym on site, you've got your everything that you need there.
Yeah. There's definitely a market for it, 100%.
And I know I touched on this with John, but the Airbnb, what the newspapers are calling the Airbnb apocalypse. Is it true that there's now 45% more properties on from Airbnb? Is that true?
Well, I'll take your word for it being.
Well, I mean, I read this in the newspaper, so.
No. I mean, the numbers I don't know, but I've actually got a little caption in one of my slides about Airbnb because it was exploding before the lockdown.
Okay.
And using it so much more. My view is, will people use it so much in the future? Because you're going to stay in an apartment or a flat or a house or a room that you don't know whether someone's been there before, how well it's been cleaned. It's going to be difficult. And I think until that stabilizes, people won't know. Certainly there was a real rush for Airbnb, and that was significant.
There was a rush for Airbnb. What do you mean? In what way?
So as people were sort of seeing that as a great way of making money and actually using their own properties. So,
right. Yeah.
So much more and more investment in that side. People buying buildings they could use as Airbnbs, short stays, definitely.
But I mean, it might also be that not straight away, but especially if people are maybe moving further out and then going into London just a couple of days a week, that they just get an Airbnb for 2 nights during the week, for example.
Indeed. When I was
but they're not going to have the same budgets, I guess, because they're going to be thinking, I want this property every Monday and Tuesday night, or...
Yeah, I think it's, but some of the people I was working with in London were, and lived remotely, were travelling in and staying a couple of nights in Airbnbs or similar, not hotels. So there is that trend, because you can self-cater, you can stay in, you can watch TV, you can cook yourself something. I preferred the hotel when I was actually travelling in and out, because things are done for you, if you like.
Yeah.
It's much easier to check in, it's much less stress, and just go out for a meal in the evening. But yeah, there were people I worked with doing Airbnb stuff.
No, yeah, interesting. I was just wondering how much that would crash the Airbnbs now, because if they're all sort of owners, that might just force their properties onto the market, if that would just really crash the normal rental market.
It was causing a lot of angst from the agent perspective, because they were getting around all sorts of compliance issues that agents and landlords under the PRS had to comply to.
What's PRS?
Private renter sector.
Okay.
But indeed the likes of the build to rent market, they're all very compliant. They have to be. Airbnb seem to be sort of getting away with quite a lot. And I suspect that had it carried on growing, legislation would have been brought into the Airbnb market for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I've thought about
Agreed.
that. And is that just the main cities that are being affected by that? Presumably there aren't any Airbnbs in, I don't know, some of the smaller towns.
There's probably not as many. There might be a few, but you're right. It's the cities that were benefiting from that. Although I really haven't looked at that side or the data on that side to be able to comment, but I guess that'd be correct.
It's just someone I spoke to. Actually, it was someone Shah had introduced me to, Lou Fletcher.
Don't know.
I don't know if you also know her. She's a friend of Shahad's and writes about property for some of the newspapers. And
an event the other day that we were exhibiting in before the lockdown. It was the Federation of Independent Agents. We did a talk for them. Okay,
but she said that most or the majority or something of Airbnbs, at least in London, that it's multi-owners. So they're people whose literally their whole income depends on the Airbnb.
Wow.
So they might end up having problems.
Yeah. Like what, having a share in...
No. So where instead of the Airbnb where it's just you're renting out your spare room, or maybe you're renting out your spare flat, it's people who effectively did like a, what was the term? Rent to rent. So they would go to landlords and guarantee them rent for 3 years, for example, and then sublet them out.
Yeah, well, that will be against the terms of a tenancy contract for sure.
Right.
And
unless they agree it beforehand, I guess. Because there are schemes like that. Landlords do let out to, say, for instance, local authorities. They'll buy it. Guaranteed rent for X amount of time. Yeah, to the local authority, and then the local authority put tenants in. So it sort of exists in one form already. Mm-hmm. But I can see that with Airbnb. But they'd have to declare their interest. I mean, most of them probably wouldn't. Adam and I are probably familiar with the old setup where people rented something and then sublet it for a profit without declaring it, which wasn't legal. Right.
But how would that have happened without something like Airbnb or so? Like to sublet it? Were there other just...
You're the tenant. You're the landlord. I'm the tenant. You agree to rent me the property and we agree a price. It's £1,000 a month. And I'm happy to say, yeah, I'll pay that, no problem. And what I then do is I go and then sublet it out and get £1,200 a month and make a small profit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Share us in there and get £2,000 a month. But yeah, that sort of thing has happened.
Interesting. How's Openbrix doing in this time? Are you just working on the tech and getting everything ready?
The tech is, as you'll know, is ever changing.
Sure.
Constant animal. But yeah, no, we've launched and onboarding agents. We're getting a lot of really positive feedback. And it's interesting because a year ago when I joined, starting to talk about blockchain, was the agent's eyes would glaze over. They thought that meant was something to do with Bitcoin. Literally, I mean, you know, agents are good at selling and letting houses. And there's a lot of compliance they have to, you know, understand and comply with. And it was just, it was a word that just used to, I could see their eyes when I talked to them. And now they're beginning to get it, and they understand about decentralizing it, and you know, they can share the control among the community, and they're beginning to get it, and it's very positive. We're getting some really positive feedback.
Okay, interesting. And presumably now, I mean, would be the best time to get them on. I mean, I had this conversation with Shahad, who thought I was being a little bit mean of taking advantage of them, but I was just thinking, if there's so many agents who are maybe furloughing or having to get rid of people because they can't afford to keep Linda or whatever in the back office on, surely now is the time to effectively be replacing some of those redundant people. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh in saying that.
I know, you know, there's no question agents are having to look at their business models themselves, from agent, and they're looking at costs, and the costs of the current portals are extremely high, and it's they're now questioning the value. So to someone like us who can bring in a much fairer pricing structure and be able to, you know, pass the control, if you like, to a community, and not gleefully raise our prices whenever we like. Something that agents are beginning to get on board with. So yeah, it is sad to say a good time for us.
Sure.
We're making
but the thing is, I mean, it's only, all of this automation was always going to happen. This has just accelerated a few things.
It's definitely going to accelerate things, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, will you see as many agents on the high street going forward? They'll all be thinking, do I need all those branches?
Right.
Should I have more of a hub set up, people working from home? It's more of an American model, but they will be thinking that because they'll think, well, actually, you know, it's with Zoom and with technology, it's much easier, less expensive. So I think it will force lots of issues, particularly tech. Tech will explode now, and it's not been very high profile for the property industry. So you can see that taking off. I mean, tech is there now, and people are interested in the property industry now, particularly the residential market, which never had that much take up. So yeah, things will change without doubt.
Do you think a lot of the agents will go, or they'll survive?
I think there'll be far fewer agents. Not all will survive. You've had a tenant fee ban. It's hit you know, fees coming through that way. Sales more of the cream, and the number of transactions this year will be substantially reduced. I reckon confidence in the market will be reduced, so you will see agents go.
Okay.
There's too many. There's already too many. And over the next few years, we'll get regulation coming in, which will deter some as well.
Thank you so very much. That's been super, super, super interesting. I've learnt loads. I'm very grateful to both of you for giving up your evenings and telling us such an amazing history and overview of the UK property market and how that's going to affect incoming technologies. And I definitely wouldn't have even thought that the history and all of the, I guess, legislative challenges would be the barrier to technology